Welcome to Financial Repression Authority's Roundtable Insight, where the best fund managers, economists, and industry leaders discuss the key investment issues and challenges in the current macroeconomic environment.
Welcome to FRA's Roundtable Insight. This is Richard Bernoulli. Today we have Claudio Grass, Godfrey Bloom, and Ira Harris. Claudio is a Mises ambassador and an independent precious metals advisor based out of Switzerland. His Austrian approach helps his clients find tailor-made solutions to store their physical precious metals under Swiss law. Godfrey entered the world of politics in 2004. Before that, he worked in the City of London for 40 years and won fixed interest investment prizes. He served as a member of the European Parliament for a decade and became widely known as a vocal opponent of government regulation and centralization. And Ira is an independent trader, hedge fund manager, global macro consultant, trading foreign currencies, equities, bonds, and commodities for over 40 years. He also served as CME director from 1997 to 2003 and also recently. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome to you. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Richard.
Great. I thought we'd get into a initial discussion on what your thoughts are for the government response to the COVID crisis. So we talked a little bit about just before beginning here. If you want to begin with that, Godfrey?
Yes, I can only speak for the United Kingdom, I'm afraid, because that's where I happen to be familiar with all the figures. But in a previous life, I was the chief executive of a life assurance company, and I was also an economic researcher for an actuarial practice. So I'm very highly experienced, as it were, in mortality statistics and the threats and things like virus threats, on and so forth. So I'm not a layman in this field. It's interesting in the United Kingdom that we had a nasty virus in 1957 and 1958, very nasty, and another nasty one in 1968. The mortality statistics of those 3 years were significantly worse than they are now. In 2010, excess deaths were round about what they were in 2020. So we have an interesting phenomenon at the moment that this is not an unprecedented problem in the United Kingdom. We've been here before. This is only the joint fourth worst virus infection we've had since the war. So it is not the coronavirus that is the problem. That isn't our problem. Our problem is government reaction to it. It's the reaction that is destroying our economy and our social and civil liberties. And this reaction has driven a coach and horses through the principles of English law, the Bill of Rights, the Toleration Act, so on as all these things that have given freedom to the British people since Magna Carta in 1215. So all these things have been taken away for a virus which is no worse than seasonal viruses have been for several decades. So we know, do we not, there's something else going on, and it isn't to do with public health.
And your thoughts, Claudio, also in relation to central bank monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus as well from government?
You know, I mean, the last 12 months really has been a crazy time. Especially, for me, I'm a Swiss, so I'm a liberty-loving individual. I grew up in a culture which is basically dominated by self-responsibility, decentralization, or better said, non-centralization. We never had a strong president. We never had a king. We have 7 of those guys. So everything was based on the principle of subsidiarity. And when I witnessed last March, the Swiss government, when it basically copy-paste the Chinese approach how to handle a flu crisis, I was deeply shocked. And from the beginning, I thought, this has nothing to do with a big pandemia. For me, it was always a kind of scapegoat because we were always expecting, a financial crisis because the system we are in is no longer sustainable. And so to me, Corona is, it's not a democratic crisis. It's basically a brutal suppression of democracy, something we haven't seen since the fall of communism.
And Ira, your thoughts?
Well, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not so I will look at the policy responses, and that's really all that I can do. I do have the great advantage, though. I have a brother who is, my oldest brother is a very well-known infectious disease doctor, and he has been for almost 50 years. Boy, I hate that I'll say that. So I do get updates, and from the day one, I mean, from that standard, and it's one of the things that's been missing. It was interesting to hear Godfrey talk about 68, because 68, I got that what was called the Hong Kong flu, and I can remember it's the sickest period. That's how fortunate I've been in my life. I was phenomenally sick. I had 106 degree temperature when I walked in the house, and my mother, just took care of it. But 80% of my school was out, but they didn't close the school. So it is interesting to see what the response is. But I only can judge this in how I see government response in an economic fashion. I can have my personal views about my libertarian. I am a libertarian, but I also, with that comes community responsibility. And in America, it's actually a good thing because the statistics, of course, on the common flu are down, which will be something really positive going forward, because Americans who have never been face mask wearers, we will be more attentive to it. So that's one of the better fallouts. Is the price paid for that? Now we'll get into the policies, and that's what I would question. But of course, government always wanting to reach farther and further, because especially in the last, 25 years, I think that's been a universal concept, reaching further and farther into our lives. This is as Rahm Emanuel would say, never let a good crisis go unused or not have some policy. And they are certainly affecting that. So what the fallout will ultimately be, we can surmise, but from a policy standpoint, I think that's where this conversation will go. So I look forward to that.
Yeah. And in that regard, there's been a lot of development recently on the green social energy and those type of developments initiatives, particularly from, for example, the European Recovery Fund. How are governments and central banks in the UK and the European continent addressing this, and how will it be paid for? Can you make some assessments on the bond market for that, Godfrey?
Well, it's interesting. The problem we have here, and I think it's global, it's not just the United Kingdom, is basically the so-called received wisdom that man-made carbon dioxide is going to cause apocalyptic global warming, which is going to somehow destroy the planet. Now, this hypothesis is becoming more and more disproved every day. In fact, it's becoming slightly absurd now after 20 years of this, and it simply isn't happening. But of course, there is no debate allowed on mainstream media in the United Kingdom. You are not allowed to bring people on who challenge the government and the establishment view. So, for example, you will have plenty of the little Swedish teenager telling us how terrible it's all going to be, but you do not have top climatic scientists like Professor Ian Plimer and his people coming on to tell us why the hypothesis is flawed. So we have had no debate here on green issues. Now, what we do know that nobody votes green in the democratic environment, certainly in the United Kingdom. They do in Germany to an extent. We only have, out of 650 seats in Parliament, one Green MP. But we have consistently green governments, one after the other. And it all comes back to the coronavirus situation. It's an opportunity to get more and more state control. And of course, it's for our own benefit. The idea, it's all for our own benefit. but we do not challenge this received wisdom. And that makes me deeply suspicious. And of course, it comes with more control and more taxation. So what is the real game behind the green lobby? What is the real situation here? And the question is, we don't know, because it's never been openly debated. It's another cut-off of democracy, a democratic debate in our parliamentary chamber on our mainstream media. So I'm deeply skeptical of the whole thing. And especially when you get big business coming in, big people like BlackRock, coming in, who obviously are under the impression that with their friends in government, it's an opportunity to make even more money out of the little people.
And Claudio?
Yes, I mean, I also believe that the last 20 years, especially, we have seen a centralization of power from the bottom to the top. I mean, governments, even over here in Switzerland, 20 years ago, Switzerland was still on a gold standard. Back then we had a balance sheet of the National Bank of 50 billion. Today we are standing at 1,000. So, it's just, and then at the same time, we have seen that, politics really have taken away the liberties of the individuals and trying to move or to go into a much more centrally administered economy. And so this Corona, to me, of course, I also believe that one of the ideology behind this Corona is also the green lies. That the man-made CO2 is basically destroying the world, which I believe is not true. It's always good that we fight against waste. Of course, it's important that we take care of nature. But the whole topic, the whole fear campaign, which has been launched for the last 20 years now, has definitely de-illusioned, especially the House. We have seen how much brainwashed they have become in the official public education system, in the universities and so on. So it's, to me, it's really, the ideologies are back. Sometimes the ideologies are brown, it can be black, it can be red. Now it's green. And so I always call, these green guys, I call them the melon fraction. The outside is green, inside red, and in the core it's brown. And so I don't support these guys, and I truly believe they want to bomb us back to the Stone Ages. And that's why I truly believe it's important that we reject all those UN plans for, greener economy and all that kind of crap, which is all based on pretense of knowledge. And at the same time, as Godfrey said, we are living in a state-accompanied thinking system. So this political correctness is basically, a weapon for the coward intellectuals, which are incapable of, competing in a free market of ideas. So that's why they need, that's why they don't want to have debates. That's why they don't want to discuss what's really going on, because they don't have the arguments and facts on their side.
And Ira, how do you see this playing out in the bond market of Europe in terms of the paying for some of these initiatives? How will that affect that?
Well, just as 50 minutes ago, I got a story out of the FT. ECB urged to decarbonize its $5 trillion corporate bond. $5 trillion corporate bond. First, I don't think the ECB is holding $5 trillion in corporate bonds. But there's movements off of it. Overnight, I read the Ambrose Evans Pritchard piece in the Telegraph. So there's all types of movement forwards, and they are going about this. It's the age-old discussion of externalities in terms of economics. And listen, pollution certainly has costs to it. We know that. And how does the society choose to pay for it? But again, the emphasis is, how does the society choose to pay for it? And expressing it, politically, yes, in Germany's kind of interesting, because I'm surprised that Merkel, who after Fukushima moved so quickly to close down the nuclear plants, or at least not build anymore and kind of let them roll off to use Bernanke language. When it comes to bonds, she was rolling off nuclear facilities, but then went and started burning some of the dirtiest coal that's mined in the world out of Germany. And she's never paid a political price for that, which is kind of interesting. But how does this get financed? We are going to see, of course, especially here in the United States. We have the Green New Deal and how that will be paid for. But again, it's the ability to reach ever deeper, promote more programs. Of course, we have Biden, pushing, and he will get somewhere close. I think. I think that they'll probably come up with $1.5 trillion, and they'll sell it on the infrastructure side, which I happen to agree. I don't agree with Larry Summers on much of anything, but you've done so much transfer payments to ease the burdens of certain people, although in the United States, we never means test anything, unfortunately, when we do these programs. So we take on far more than we ever need to intend to. But had we actually done some updated infrastructure, which this country badly needs, it would have been a far more positive program. Well, but as usual, they build in so much pork by the time they get something that there's going to be a huge cost to it. We'll probably, I hope, get into the deeper discussion of how they're going to contain paying the interest on that cost, because that's the next argument that will certainly rise its head here as we get to, there's no way to avoid it, yield curve control in the United States, which will be a major step for the global financial system as to how to dollar. But I think the Chinese are very attentive to that and positioning themselves accordingly by whatever they're choosing to do with yuan. And again, we like to look at the United States from the bottom up, but China is certainly always a top-down story. So you have to figure and analyze what they're doing from the top down. So I'm sure we'll get into that discussion.
And Godfrey, you've recently observed that the great central banking experiment has failed. Can you elaborate on that view and how that's happening?
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? We've had you could argue one with the other, but I mean, I would suggest that the experiment is round about 100 years old, and the concept of it has been a central bank, in order to be what has sometimes been argued academically as the lender of last resort. And of course, what we've actually seen as now the 100 years has come sort of full circle, as it were, that we have what is an underpin of what has been the Keynesian experiment, which is sometimes now referred to as modern monetary theory, which is that debt doesn't matter to the state. It matters to you or your family or your business, but it doesn't matter somehow to the state. Now, of course, this argument is ludicrous. Of course, debt matters. You can't go on and on and on ad infinitum, spending more money than you actually bring in. All you do, of course, is degrade the currency. And we've seen, even in the last 20 years, since the beginning of this century, a basket of fiat currencies losing 80% of its value against gold. We know that when Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, we know that the 1971 dollar now buys about 6 cents worth of goods and services. Well, if that isn't failure, I don't know what failure is. That screams failure. And as for the central banks being the lender of last resort, of course, we know that that simply isn't true. The lender of last resort is the people, the taxpayer. And we found that out, of course, in Britain, when the banks in trouble had to be nationalized in 2007. And yet again, it's the little people that pick up the tab. It's your butcher, your baker, your cab driver, your hairdresser who picks up the tab for this in tax and degraded money, while the bankers get fatter and fatter. And I said, and it got over 30 million views when I was speaking in the European Parliament on this, until we start hanging bankers, this will never end.
And your thoughts, Claudio?
Yeah. Well, I love Godfrey. I have the feeling. I mean, the world has changed already. I mean, we're not going to go back to pre-corona days, and I think we are in the final stage of the current system. And Corona is a scapegoat, not to blame the bankers and the politicians for this big mess, to basically just be able to blame it on this coronavirus. Because right now, the financial market and the real economy is completely decoupled from each other. I mean, it's a joke. When I look at the financial markets, I really feel like in Las Vegas, because at the end of the day, it's about the same. Markets are going up. At the same time, we see that private businesses are being destroyed on a global scale. We are in a lockdown for 12 months now, partially and ongoing, and the division of labor on an international scale is already disrupted tremendously, and big parts of the private economy, small mid-sized companies, restaurant owners, shop owners, and so on. I mean, they are broke. So to me, because the world has changed, I only see two outcomes. Either we go the decentralized way, or we go the centralized way. And I think when we see what the Great Reset guys, the World Economic Forum, the Build Back Better movement, and so on, I mean, these are all ideas coming from the centralized side. And I don't believe that this is going to be, can solve it, because central planning never worked. It will never work. So because it will always lead to a misallocation of goods and services, because you don't have prices in a centralized, in a centrally planned economy. And that's basically what these guys are looking for. And so to me, I truly believe that we don't have to kill the king if we just can ignore the king. And I hope that a lot of people, individuals, are going to see what's coming, because we are in the big calm right now before the storm. I mean, the avalanche is running. It hasn't hit yet, but it's just a matter of time until the whole system is going to blow up. That's at least the way I see it. And then what the people will make out of it, if they're going to join the centralized side with all these centralized digital coins and the new Green Deal and the universal basic income and all that stuff, with the digital IDs and the unity passports and the track and tracing and so on. We'll see how many people are going for that side, the domesticated ones at the end of the day, the people who are who are looking for shelter and food, but not for liberty. But at the same time, I believe a lot of people out there realize once they will see that, their income is gone, that the economy has collapsed, that they will, exit, the system, and try to rebuild with like-minded people a new economy, as well as a new system for society, which is more decentralized, based on the principles of subsidiarity and so on.
And Claudio, what are your thoughts on the Swiss National Bank, a central bank of Switzerland, where you are based, in terms of their monetary policies in the recent past, doing essentially financial alchemy on printing money to buy like U.S. equities, global equities? What are your thoughts on that and the sustainability of that? As I said, we had the balance 20 years ago. We had a balance sheet of roughly 50 billion, and now we're standing at 1,000 billion. So I mean, it's just crazy. And so of course, central bank has to do what central banks are doing. But I truly believe it's the wrong approach. It's even the information. Our central banks were also telling us, we have to depreciate the currency, and that makes us rich. This is just nonsense. Weakening the currency. I mean, if that would work, then Zimbabwe would be, the role model. And it seems a bit to me that Zimbabwe School of Economics is the role model for the world these days, and also for the Swiss National Bank. I mean, it's a hedge fund, and so overall, I mean, it's just it helps to prolong certain things. But I think the outcome will be as catastrophic as for the rest of the central banks. And your thoughts, Ira?
Yes, Richard, I like the way you set that table, because look at, I think the experiment that the SNB has been running for at least I would say the last 2 years, but we can probably go back to January 15th of 2015 when it unleashed the forces, when it I don't know why they ever put a peg in to begin. I know that there's so much trade with the euro, of course, but there was an indefensible situation. But what they have been doing is if I was back in school, if I could tolerate being the ivory tower idiots, I would be doing my dissertation on the alchemy of the Swiss National Bank. Because unlike any other central bank, at least they're not buying their own shitty assets. They're not buying Swiss bonds. They're buying everybody else's real assets. Apple stock. I think there's 3,800 different shares. And they're not buying ETFs. They're buying individual companies. So at least they're going that route. I mean, the ECB, of course, is buying the sovereign 19 different countries, and I would probably say, I'm going to say 14 of them I would never hold in my life. 5 of them I might if there was a attractive enough yield. But this is a great experiment, and I love that Claudio talks about them talking their currency down, because that's the only thing that Thomas Jordan seems to know how to do. Now that Hildebrand and his wife have been able to go shopping at the finest stores because she could trade the inside information, and that's a whole different story. But it does rise to what China is doing. And so what Claudio talks about, and this is something I've been blogging about for months and months, and it goes back to Michael Pettis's work. If the Chinese economy is shifting to a more domestic-based consumption, again, you have to look at China top down. The bottom up is not there. It's not how decisions are made. But if they're shifting, and a major shift, as Pettis has suggested for quite a long time, so moving from the domestic consumption from 38%, let's say they go to 50%, which is still far below the more developed economies of the world, they want a stronger currency. And when you look, the yuan, and it's, to me, one of the great parts of the story of the last year, that the yuan has gone from 6.8 or 6.85 or 6.9 all the way down as we sit here at 6.45 as we embark upon the Lunar New Year. But this has been a sustained rally. And at the same time, what has happened since last April, we've been on a major move in raw materials around the globe, be it grains, be it iron ore, be it now we're getting platinum involved, copper, so many things. And you go, well, everybody's proclaiming, because every central bank proclaims how slow the global economy is, and the IMF was worth a shit anyway. They always come up with their prognosis, which if I would have invested based on their prognosis, I would have been broke long ago. So I care not a lick for them. But they're talking about how slow the economy are, and yet commodity prices are going ever higher, especially in the grain market. And yet we're not in drought. We're in we're very robust crops. Now Brazil is bringing in another record crop. So somebody is accumulating lots of raw material. And I know who that somebody has to be, because it coincides with the continual strengthening of their currency. And if you're importing all these goods, you may as well run a strong currency, because that's the way you enrich your consumers. If you're trying to build a consumption-based economy, or try to switch from an export-oriented, you want a currency rising in value. Now, where they get concerned, I don't know. If I look at the technicals, as I'm prone to do at times, it's not how I start my trades, but it's how I protect myself and look for targets. Or we may go back to that January 1st, 1994 level of 5.8 yuan to the dollar when the Chinese government, at the commencement of NAFTA, January 1st, 1994, there are no coincidences, devalued the yuan 50% from 5.8.7. Now they're redoing it. So they are in the middle of a shift. And as Claudio says, if you're trying to, you don't want to depreciate your currency if you want to enrich your middle class. So that continues to bear watching.
Related to that, Godfrey, do you see rising inflation for the indebted Western world in the pipeline? And if so, to what extent?
Well, yes, it has to be so. And of course, Ira's put his fingers right on it. He's absolutely right in everything he says. It is really, there's no other way of looking at it. If you want to get that end, you have to, degradation of currency is never the answer. It's never, ever the answer to anything. And of course, just picking up very quickly on the ECB, when I was on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee in Brussels, what you have to understand, and I'm sure you do, I'm sure you all do, but maybe listeners may not understand it quite so well, is that, of course, the euro and the ECB is a purely political entity. So the fact that the ECB is buying the sort of rubbish that IRA, of course, would never buy, rubbish bonds, rubbish sovereign debt, and indeed, even rubbish corporate debt. The ECB buys billions of euros worth of appalling debt. For example, they say it's asset-backed, for example, and you'll be looking at, let's say, BMW Finance or VW Finance. What you're actually doing, the asset is a degrading value motor car. This is the kind of thing, and I had this out with the president in committee on a number of occasions when it was Professor Draghi. I was trying to explain to him, a lot of these people don't understand money. You'd be very surprised to know that I sat with these people and they don't actually understand either money or the consequences of their action. Now, we must have inflation. If you have, and of course, the Austrian definition of inflation is monetary inflation. Now, at the moment, of course, people think we haven't had inflation. No, it's only been 2%, or it's not reached the goal of 2%. That's absolutely nonsense. What we've actually seen is massive inflation in money, in monetary terms. We know that to be the case. And this money, of course, finds its way, as it always does, into the assets. It finds its way into assets because it's gone via the banks. And so consequently, you have the Cantillon effect, where the people at the beginning of the queue, at the front of the queue, do very well because they're first receivers of money, and the people at the back don't. Now, when you inflate currency, which is being inflated beyond the scale of human imagination, we're talking trillions. We're talking trillions. It's beyond human imagination, the sort of numbers that we're talking about. Debt, I think, of national corporate and sovereign debt of 270 trillion globally. That is beyond human imagination. And to imagine that that won't go to the high street, move from Wall Street to Main Street, as the Americans would say, is absurd. Of course it will. And when you see the increase in gold, for example, or platinum or silver or whatever it is, or commodities, one mustn't ever make the mistake that it is because these are going up in price. What you're seeing is the petrodollar is being degraded and it's going down. So if you had a gold, let's just take gold for a moment, if I may, keep it simple. If you have a gold sovereign dated 1905, it would have bought you bed and breakfast in London in 1905. If you have a gold sovereign today and went to London, it would buy you bed and breakfast in London. It, in fact, would buy you bed and breakfast in any city in the world because it's a store of wealth. Not an investment. Gold isn't an investment. It's a store of wealth. It's money. It's real money, as J.P. Morgan told us all those years ago. Only gold is money. So this is what we're dealing with. And as soon as you have fiat currency, paper currency, which governments can print and print on a scale undreamt of before, we won't just have inflation per se. We will see it return to its intrinsic value. Paper money will go to its intrinsic value, which is nothing. And we will end up, instead, what we saw in 1923 in the Weimar Republic, will then be global, certainly in the Western democracies who've been doing this scandalous counterfeiting of money now for a very long time. And so it's going to get much, much worse. And I would suggest it's something that the world has never seen before. This isn't Hungary or post-war Austria or 1923 Weimar. This is on a global scale, the collapse of fiat currencies and the current banking system. And I don't think most people have got their handle on it. Most people can't see this coming, you know.
Your thoughts, Claudio, and also for the potential of fiat currency collapse?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with Godfrey. I mean, just if you think about 1 trillion seconds represent 31,709 years. So it's a huge sum. I mean, it's really, this is people, normal people cannot grasp, how big that figure is. And then on the other side, of course, the scarcity of money is never an issue. It's always the scarcity of goods and services. That's because that's what it's all about. And I mean, these guys are propagating a reset. They're talking about the Great Reset. So to me, we should take these guys serious, because what we are witnessing over the last 12 months, think about it. If somebody would have told you more than a year ago that they could shut down, the global economy, we would all have laughed about such a strange idea. And now we are in this crazy rational process for more than a year. And goods and services are getting scarce. At the same time, we see that central banks are printing like crazy. And so to me, this is not going to have a good outcome. And I truly believe that we are going towards that reset. But we don't know yet how it will look like, once it's coming down. And I even believe that these central planners, these guys, they also have no clue. They just try to propagate certain ideas which would fit into their dogma, in their ideological dogmas and into their specific business needs. But I don't believe that, people are going to follow. I still believe that we are rational. Man knows the concept of we can think. That distinguishes us from animals. So we are rational people. We can learn. We can combine. We can think independently. And one fine day, in the coming weeks or months, we can already see over here in Switzerland that the whole narrative is shifting. People really are getting more upset day by day because they see that their future is demolished and that their businesses is basically destroyed. So that's where we are. And we'll see, when the riots will break out. We already see them everywhere on this planet, but I think that's just the beginning.
And Claudio, you specialize in precious metals. Can you give us your thoughts on short, medium term potential price targets for gold, silver, and platinum?
To me, gold and physical gold and silver and also platinum. As Godfrey said, gold is money, everything else is credit. So I'm not in the gold business because I thought, I can become a rich guy very fastly. To me, it's also, we need sound money for a sound society, and gold is definitely, gold became money because market participants decided freely what they wanted to accept as money, and that so the market has brought out gold and silver, and we have been on this global gold standard at least until 1971, as Godfrey mentioned, when Nixon closed down the gold window, and now for 50 years we are in this credit market, and we have seen trillions being injected. So I think, short term, it's always hard to say because all the markets are manipulated. Everything is manipulated. Everything is fake out there. What you can see in the financial markets, in the news, it's really all fake. But I just look at gold, when I see the price levels right now, I truly believe it's extremely attractive. Everyone that has no gold is making a big mistake. I think you need physical gold, you need physical silver. Platinum is a bargain, but also base metals are making, hard assets are making sense because they are going to profit from the inflation, which we're going to see. Rising fastly over the coming months. So therefore, I'm very bullish for physical gold and silver. And I can only recommend people that they should build up their hedge against a crash of the current system.
Great. And Ira, your thoughts on the precious metals?
Oh, you guys. So I would say I'm 100% agreement that gold can have it can be money because, what does money do? Money, first and foremost, if the sovereign who issues it is a sound fiduciary, like the Swiss have historically been, and others in the United States was at one time, you have to have a fiduciary. And the danger for the system, of course, is that the global reserve currency is anything but a fiduciary. So when I hear the hue and cry of, oh, the dollar's a haven, the dollar's not a haven of anything when you really cut back. It's only a haven for the idiots who pontificate using old staid models that have really lost their way. Nothing says it more than even Jerome Powell's willing to throw the Phillips curve onto the trash heap of long-held bad ideas. But the metals do, of course, play an important role. And nothing says it more. I've been at a quiet battle with the bastion of Keynesian thought. And I'm not deriding Keynesian thought because I think Keynes had a lot of good ideas, but I'm much more of a libertarian and believe that Joseph Schumpeter was a far greater economist who's underappreciated, except by the Austrians, who understood credit first and foremost, which is how you have to perceive, to me, in any quality analysis of the global macro system. But why doesn't the IMF sell off its gold hoard? It's always boggled my mind. Or at least if they don't sell it off, monetize it by issuing gold-backed bonds, which I believe we're going to see from the Chinese and the Russians, high metalism return, which would be a nice throwback at the Brits, because while the rest of the world is smoking opium, and instead of being gold bugs, Godfrey, people use that as a pejorative term. You're a gold bug. No, I'm not. I'm just protecting the store of value. But I said, if you're calling me a gold bug in a pejorative sense, you must be a fiat currency bug. So which one would you perceive over the last 100 years has done better? So let's put that to rest. But I think that gold will play an important role. And I think that the Chinese will especially reveal this, and the Russians too, in order to give more credibility to their currency, will initially have some type of either commodity backed, but certainly I think a precious metal backed, just to elevate themselves in a way that they'll need to be, greatly more accepted before they will really gain that stature. But I would throw this to Claudio, which is if the Swiss citizen, and I know they've voted on gold, they've had a couple of referendums, and I love the Swiss referendums. By the way, I think I actually had written a graduate school paper on the Swiss referendums when I was studying under a Finnish, what was his name, Pertti Pessinen from Finland. So I go back quite a way. So I find those interesting, but I want to know why the Swiss are not busy liquidating some of their equity assets and reasserting themselves into the precious metals world. To me, that would make perfect sense because they have such enormous profits that it would be, and I agree, I love that Claudio called them a hedge fund because they are a hedge fund, but they have one thing that no other hedge fund has, which is a printing press. So it's easy to overcome your errors. Even I'm a successful trader with that mechanism. But my question, if I was Thomas Jordan, I don't have a lot of respect, sorry for Thomas Jordan, I would start to liquidate quietly some of my paper assets and start moving more of my money into the hard assets, and that would be an important statement for the world. Just as what they've done has been an important statement because they have been, as I say, every year I give the SNB the alchemist of the last two millennium. What they have done is just the fact that they can keep printing Swiss and get the world to accept them while they're buying assets. That's a greater trick than Mario Draghi. And let me finish up with that. Mario Draghi's entrance into Italian politics is really interesting to me. And we've seen the Italian yields drop under 50 basis points on a 10-year BTB, which is unbelievable. But while the media said, well, this is because Mario Draghi has so much ability and confidence, but yes, I'll tell Mario Draghi has always played a confidence game. And if Italy is actually, I think, pretty smart here, because with Mario Draghi as prime minister, Europe could never say no to the Italians because Mario knows where every skeleton and every body is buried. And he's a dangerous force in running a country. And to me, the markets have understood it, and they're bidding up Italian debt because, hey, they know that Europe will guarantee they have to. There's no alternative other than to blow Europe apart. And I think Claudio and Godfrey have both laid that out. That's not happening. Godfrey, you might be surprised to learn that I am a very good friend of Bernard Connolly. And so I've had, over the last 25 years, such mega discussions. I came to him because people introduced us because of my views on Europe, going back to the late 80s and early 90s. And I was certainly in the brief of Milton Friedman and Martin Feldstein, and of course, one of the great economists of the last 30, 40 years, Rudy Dorn, all warned about Europe was doing this backwards. They were creating a political union with the help of a euro without ever getting to a unified, harmonized taxing system or a euro bond. So, I mean, that's where I'll leave it. And what happens with this when push comes to shove. But I think that Draghi's entry into this from a political level now is more than of a passing interest.
Your thoughts, Godfrey?
That's an excellent summary of the last few decades. Absolutely brilliant. And yes, I mean, obviously, I knew that, but an awful lot of people listening to this won't know that. Yes, absolutely fascinating. It is totally political. And I think my first lecture to Cambridge University was in about 1994, when I tried to explain to an economics faculty at Jesus College at Cambridge exactly what this was all about. And it was terribly unfashionable. And although they were very hospitable, they rather sneered at my assessment of the situation. Of course, and that was somewhere in the region, that was 6 or 7, that was about 8 years before actually the euro was launched. So all these things, and I've made speeches in the chamber on many occasions, it's exactly right. It is a political system, and what they tried to do is bind people together with hoops of steel with a common currency, which is doomed to failure. Now, perhaps one thing that Ira might like to perhaps respond to, and that is, yes, he's absolutely right in his assessment of Mario Draghi, who is actually, incidentally, quite a charming fellow, as most confidence tricksters are. But you can always support Portugal, you can support Greece, you can rally round, and you can kick the can down the road. But the Italian economy is really very much bigger than that. And although I accept the fact that they will have to somehow paper over the cracks, with Italy, sooner or later, the whole ghastly truth of the matter must come out. You cannot cover for Italy forever, because there will come a time when the German taxpayer, the German middle class, begin to understand just what they've lost. At the moment, they think they've done jolly well by selling lots of BMWs and VWs and Audis and chemicals and so on and so forth to the rest of Europe. But of course, as we all know, they haven't been paid. And if you look at Target 2 and the shadow banking, they're owned nearly €1 trillion. So they've exported all these wonderful cars and these wonderful goods, absolutely marvelous, but they haven't actually been paid in real terms. And they're going to find that out. And I think they're going to find that out sooner rather than later. And it's going to come as a huge shock to the German middle class.
I guess on a final question in that front, Godfrey. Go ahead, Ira.
I think, and that's absolutely right. Those Target 2 accounts, which is everybody just transferring money to Germany because you have to trust Germany. I'm more comfortable buying a bund at negative. Oh, I'm sorry, I just broke out in hives. The fact that I could say I'm more comfortable buying a bund at negative 42 basis points than I am certainly buying a French oat at negative 22 basis points. I mean, this is absolutely insanity. And it was the French. It's always the French. I'm sorry. Since 1871, it's always the French who muck up all things, because the issue with Italy was brought into the euro as usual at too high a level because the French demanded it. Because after the breakup of September of 1992, when the pound drops out and the peseta and the lira are pushed out, and then they have to reassessed and revalued. Well, Milan was kicking Paris's butt in moving the fashion industry because Italy devalued the currency, while, of course, one of the great idiots of the last 25 years, Jean-Claude Trichet, was busy with the Fort Franc fighting to sustain the level, I believe, of the franc to the Deutschmark at 3.41. So the Italians went on their merry way. But in order to bring it all together, they had to threaten the elites of Italy, and they had to come in at that level, which protected French industry. These things don't go away, and I know that's what Godfrey's main point. They just don't. And as I've maintained, and I've written for 11 years in my blog, well, especially after Draghi's July of 2012. Whatever it takes, there are no taboos, that it is the German credit card that guarantees the whole project. Now, as long as that is sustained, the world can buy European debt. But as Godfrey rightly says, when the German populace say, you know what, our credit card is no longer securing this, then you better be long bunds and short everything else in the entire thing. But when will that happen? I have no idea, because the world has ability to fool itself. But if it all works out just like the stock market is priced for nirvana, bond yields in Europe especially, I mean worldwide, because it forces all debt. Global debt is so low because of course, the central banks, they deny it, but there's no other alternative to it. It's not because of excess global savings. It's nonsense. Because in order for capitalism to work, debt has to be priced at a level that borrowers and, as Schumpeter would argue, entrepreneurs have to, pay a certain price. Otherwise, when money's free, it just doesn't work. But as Schumpeter always learned, that it's easier to stop a person from borrowing by raising rates than it is to get a person to borrow by lowering rates even to zero if there's no opportunity to generate a qualitative return on those borrowings. So it's the world in which we live in.
And just a final question. Godfrey, what are your thoughts on Brexit? And do you think there's a possibility for Italy to pull out of the EU or the EMU?
That's a very interesting question. Generally speaking, the European Union has been moderately supported by most of the people in most of the European Union countries, except the British, who've never really liked it, never really trusted it, because they were told it was simply a trade arrangement. The common market, it was sold to the British in 1974 referendum. It was said, it's a common market. And people voted for it because a common market sounds very sensible. No red tape, which, of course, those of us who know about the European Union now laugh at. No red tape. The whole concept of the European Union is built on red tape. Anyway, we've gone, and some of the it's some of the countries, it's very unpopular, especially the countries who have come out of the Soviet Union. They're beginning to realize it's not quite what they thought either. So you've got your Hungarians and your Poles, your Baltic states and your Central Europeans like the Czech Republic, who are beginning to think this isn't quite what they wanted and not quite what they signed up to. They didn't sign up to a central superstate to be told what to do by Brussels. And they don't want that any more than they did want to be told what to do by Moscow. And it's a very slow learning curve for them, but they're starting to push back. And I think the time will come when something will trigger. Something will trigger. And I don't know what that trigger is going to be. It could be Italy. I think it's still, I did suggest this in Cambridge in the mid-1990s, that it would be Italy in some way. They're a very... I love Italy, and they're very an interesting people, a lively people, a volatile people, and I think the British will put up with almost anything because we're a bit sheep-like, we British, and we just go along with the flow. But the Italians aren't like that, and I think it will break. And interesting enough, the French Euroscepticism is coming to the fore under Marine Le Pen, and it could be France that actually decides that they've had enough of this, because it was all very well when the European Union was a German horse with a French jockey. That isn't quite the case now. And I think when the French public electorate, who are quite a sophisticated electorate, more sophisticated than the British electorate, will suddenly begin to realize this isn't quite what they wanted either. I think the whole thing will implode. It could be led by a collapse of the ECB, but it could be any number of things. But as Ira says, when? The question is, when will all this happen? And of course, that's the key. That's the key. If we knew when, wouldn't we all be very rich men?
And your thoughts, Claudio?
Yeah, Germany has been the economic powerhouse of the European Union. And as we can see, they are deindustrializing tremendously or very fastly. And I think, we are moving towards a huge change. And nobody knows how long, it's going to last. I mean, I don't even know how the world would look like in 6 months' time, to be honest. And but I just want to say, people, prepare for the worst. The world has changed, and make sure that you have your financial independency, some stuff which is independent of the financial system, so that you have your insurance on the side, which is hard assets, physical precious metals, and so on. And let's wait and see what's coming out over the coming months.
Great. And final thoughts, Ira?
Yeah, all of the above. So it's not quite as clear. One of the great works of Niall Ferguson, when he writes his history of World War I, and how they kept going along, and everybody figured, because the bond markets were in total negation, even as the trains were running to the fronts with troops there. The bond markets really never reflected it, and which is surprising because I always looked at the bond markets. But right now they're in the throes of that's the world that is just been thrown so up in the air. Again, we saw it yesterday with Powell's testimony. But I'll leave you with this. In 2016, I was at a seminar in Chicago where I'm originally from, and stationed, and I was at the Chicago Global Initiative. It was June 27th. Godfrey, you'll appreciate this, 2016. So it was the Monday after the Brexit vote. And Jerome Powell, who was not yet, he was just a Fed governor, he was not chair yet, but he talks about the world, So, and then it came to the Q&A, and I had the last question just by happenstance. And I asked him after all this, who guarantees the ECB? With all that purchasing of debt, who guarantees that? I wanted to hear a Fed governor. And without blanching, he said, they have a printing press. And just remember that, because that That's the mindset that exists within those walls, and they will defend it. But their defense of that printing press and the privilege of printing is what weighs heavily upon the world, and that's what makes China really so interesting to watch. And as Godfrey, I can tell by his historical analysis, the Chinese, unlike a lot of other people, they don't forget. And they are, and I'm in the middle of reading Deng Xiaoping's biography right now, the wonderful one by Ezra Vogel, once you get through the first 100 pages. But it's really pretty good. And you realize the Chinese don't forget. And the scars from the Opium Wars, and which was an attempt to debase the Chinese money, which was silver-backed by then, those remain. So I keep my eyes on China as to how they're going to attack the global monetary system. And I think that's going to be a big story in the next 5 or 10 years. And it'll play out slowly, but it's worth watching. But that's where it puts us. So I guess that's where we can end it.
Great, and just thought if we could make a round on explaining to our listeners how they can learn more about your work or keep in touch. Godfrey?
Everything's on my website, which is terribly easy. It's just Godfrey Bloom, smallcase.uk, and you'll find articles and videos and bits and pieces, and I hope we enjoy it, and certainly thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Yes, thank you so much. And Claudio?
Well, I also have my own homepage. It's claudiograss.ch. So I'm also publishing roughly 4 articles a month about precious metals, geopolitics, philosophy. I think, it's a combination of different topics, and everyone can sign up for free. So that's where they will find me.
Great. And Ira?
Well, I'm still writing notes from underground, not as frequently, but the story seems to be so much embedded, suffering some things, and you wonder why it allows me to voice. And the readership is because of the, as you know, Richard, the exchange that takes place, the dialogue after an article is published, and we go back and forth. Pretty good. So Notes from Underground, you can go to Ira Harris, YRAHARRIS.com, and Notes from Underground will pop up, and you can register for it. And like Claudio and Godfrey, it's free. I invite the dialogue as long as we stay away. As I say, it's not a political. This is about policies and how to create smarter trades and smarter investments. And that's what it is. And it has a nice global following, which is important, of a really good dialogue. So I await Claudio to go to Claudio and Godfrey's websites, but Notes from Underground, and you can get the Ira Harris, YRAHARRIS.com. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for the insightful discussion. Thank you.
The FRA Roundtable Insight Show is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell any securities. The investments, investment strategies, and investment philosophies discussed or presented on the show each involve their own unique risk factors which are not discussed on the show. Any discussions among the panel participants or responses to listener inquiries are based on the personal opinions of the panel participants and do not take into consideration the listener's suitability, objectives, or risk tolerance. Please be advised that you invest or speculate at your own risk.